it.
All right. So my name is Mark Shotland. I'm from Moab Paper, and I'll be your hidden moderator, meaning that Evan is going to be pulling all the way to the show. I'm going to hide myself and just kind of moderate the questions and kind of pop in case Evan starts rambling, but that never happens. But first, I wanted to thank everybody for being here today and hope you're staying safe and healthy wherever you are. And thanks for spending an hour with us in Moab, and hopefully you come away with some new knowledge. So I'm pleased to introduce Evan Parker. He handles all of our technical questions at Moab. So if you've ever kind of sent us an email asking about some technical aspects of our papers or printers, more than likely he's the one who answered you. He's a professional photographer and a custom printer who lives in Seattle. And his goal is really to demystify the printing process and make it part of the creative process. So, Evan, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, and welcome to our inaugural Q&A. So hopefully this will go well, and it's something that we'll start doing on a semi-regular basis. And while we're all stuck at home, it's a great way to hopefully make things a little easier and get people printing with some extra time that we have, because it's tough to go out and shoot, but great time to edit photos and make prints and learn a few things and kind of get rolling.
So speaking of rolling, I'll kick it off with a question that has to be hands down the most popular question we get into Moab anywhere. And that is, how do you download an ICC profile?
How do you download an ICC profile? Well,
before you answer the question, just a reminder, anybody who wants to ask a question, just post it into the chat window and I'll do my best to moderate that.
So kicking it off here, I'm going to go over to our website. Well, first I'm going to go over to Photoshop, but then we'll go over to our website. So this is moabpaper.com, the homepage. And when you're looking for profiles, they're under this menu that says ICC profiles. We often call them color profiles, but they're also called ICC profiles. And our first stop is our download page. So that loads. And your first step will be right below the orange box. Begin by selecting your printer brand. So today we're going to say that I have a Canon, and it happens to be the Pro 1000. So that will be on the list here, the Image Prograph Pro 1000. And that brings up all of our profiles. And another thing to notice here is on the left column, we have our Moab paper names. In the center column, we have our media type setting. This is another thing we get asked about a lot. When you go to print, say on the Canon Pro 1000, and you're looking for a paper type, you won't see our Moab paper names. You will see all the Canon paper names. So if you were to use our Intrada Rag Bright with this profile, then on the Canon, you would select matte photo paper when you're printing. So once you locate this download page and you've downloaded your profiles, I always recommend taking a screenshot or printing out this page and setting it next to your printer so that you have a good reference as to, hey, what media type do I use when you go back to print on a paper?
So since you're on this page, sorry to interrupt, because we have a question from Dan, which kind of ties into the next part. Can you show us how to use the ICC profile? So finish your thought, and then maybe you can go to the next step on how to download.
Absolutely. So one thing that we've done here is in our profile names, and I'll touch on this in Photoshop, is we've actually added the initials of the media setting to the end of the profile name. So looking back at this Intrada Rag Bright that you use matte photo paper, the profile name will end MPP for matte photo paper. So as you're becoming more accustomed to the print process, that's a quick little cheat sheet that you can reference. So as to how to print with a profile, I'll start off with that in Photoshop. So we have our image open here, and we're going to say File, Print. And first thing we would do is pick our printer. And so for consistency, I'll stick with the Canon Pro 1000 that we've been talking about. Then immediately below that, the first section here in Photoshop is color management. And the first pull down says color handling. We want to switch that to Photoshop manages colors. That means that we have control over what profile it wants to pick. Now, most of you will have a short list of color profiles. I happen to have a very long list because we have a lot of printers here. But we're going to, again, stay with Intrada. on the Canon. So in Photoshop, all these profiles are in alphabetical order. And I'm looking for Moab, Intrada, Bright, or Natural. Let's see. Pro 1000. So that's right here. And again, you can see all of these profile names have media setting initials at the end of them to try and keep that straight. So once I choose my profile here, then I go back up to the top and click the print settings button. And that brings up this other window that I mentioned where you have to choose your media setting. So we're going to print this on letter paper. And then we're going to go to quality and media, which is where we would choose that matte photo paper that I recommended. So this is the key, that this media type matches the media type recommended in the profile. And I realized I might be a little confusing here in that this profile that I've selected actually uses highest density fine art paper. You can see over here HD FAP, which we've reproduced here. So as long as this media type matches the initials in the profile name, then you know that those two agree and you'll get accurate color. If your media type doesn't match the media type for your profile, you can just expect that your colors will be a little off in your print. So we'll save that. And then if I was going to print this, I would just click print and away we go. All right, what's up next?
All right, Walter, do you update printer paper profiles regularly? And if so, would we have to also update our profiles as well?
That's a very good question. So for newer printers or for printers that have come out in the last couple of years, the profiling hardware has gotten good enough that we are not really doing any updates. Once we issue those profiles, they'll be good to go. For instance, I'm working right now on the new Epson wide format, the P7570, and once those are ready, that'll be the one set of profiles we'll issue. As time allows, I do go back sometimes and look at somewhat recent printers that maybe were used with older profiling hardware or other things like that, and those will get updated. And when we do update them, at the top of that download page, I can go back there. Let's see. We put a little note right up here at the top below Moab paper that says all profiles updated, April 2020 or whenever it was done. So then you have an idea of when the last time those profiles were updated.
Okay, and Valentino has a question, and there's a little confusion about this as well, about the media type presets. She asks, are you planning on making your own media type presets at some point, or are the default Canon media type presets always okay to use?
So I'm assuming that she's asking about Canon's AM1 files or custom media files. Those are available for the Pro 1000 and then the larger wide format, the 2000, 2100 and that sort of thing. So for the Pro 1000, we will likely stick to just doing the ICC profiles. It can be a bit of a cumbersome process when you're starting out to install and manage those custom media files. It is looking like for the wider formats, the 2000, 4000, 6000, we will do a group of custom media files this year because the Canon has gotten the software kind of grown up enough that the biggest thing it helps with is media calibration, feed calibration. So for instance, a number of our papers will use the same media setting, but because they're different thicknesses, sometimes that can cause banding on the Canon printers. So in order to prevent that, we can use the custom media file and then you get a calibration for each media setting. So yeah, keep an eye out. It'll probably be a couple of months, but we will be working on those. And since we have them, we'll keep the ICC profiles as well, so that if you need to download something real quick and test it, you don't have to go through the process of installing a full custom media file.
Okay, Lisa's asking why she's getting color shifts printing on matte paper. She's used the Moab exhibition luster with no problem, but using the matte and color, the color is way off.
Okay, so tips to double check first is make sure that media setting matches the one that we recommend with the profile. If they're black and white, sometimes that can cause a bit of a color shift, and in that case you might want to try using the black and white mode on a Canon printer or the advanced black and white on an Epson printer. And the third thing is if you're using the Canon Pro 100 or the Epson Artisan 1430, both of those printers use dye ink, which is not optimized for matte paper and sometimes can cause a little bit of color shift and a slight loss in detail versus pigment ink, which is in most of the other photo printers. So hopefully that gives you a few places to get started.
So one missing link, because you taught us how to find the ICC profile. You showed us where the download button was, and then you showed us how to use it. But how do you find that ICC profile after you've downloaded it?
Okay. So this can be a bit of a challenge. So we're going to go through the profile installation step. Let's see. So we're back here. So I'm gonna say, well, I'm printing on the Moab, the Juniper Baryta rag, which is this paper right here. So again, Photo Paper Pro Platinum will be the media setting that I use. But first thing I'm going to do is hit Download Profile. Now, when you download, the default location these days is a folder called Downloads, both on Windows and Mac, but you could have pointed your download somewhere else. So I'm going to download the profile, and it pops up down there in the bottom. So my downloads folder happens to be in my dock. So here you can see the profile that I've downloaded. Now on the Mac, it can be a little tricky to install a profile because Apple has done a really good job of hiding the folder from you that you need to put it in. And we have a quick tutorial on our site that references this, but the folder you're looking for is on your hard drive. It's in Library Color Sync Profiles. And the library folder is hidden by default. So what you want to do is you want to go to the Finder, the little smiley face, which brings up all your file lists. You can close whatever's opened. Up at the top of your screen, you're going to go to the Go menu. So you see Finder, File, Edit, Go. And normally you don't see Library, but if you hold down the Option key on your keyboard, Library will appear. There are a number of tutorials out there on the web to permanently show your library, which is what I've done because I have to access that folder quite a bit. But Go menu, hold down Option, Library appears, you click on it, and it opens the library folder, and you'll navigate to Color Sync and then Profiles. Now the best thing to do here is to open a new Finder window, so you have them side by side, and then you can go to your Downloads, and you see the profile that we downloaded, and all you have to do is drag it into your profiles folder, and it has now been installed, and you only have to do this once. Once you've installed it, it's there for all of your applications to use. And if you want to, if it gets complicated, you can make folders as I've done, but you can mainly just drop your profiles in there. And so once that part is completed, you can go back to your imaging application. For this, we're using Photoshop. On a Mac, generally, you don't have to restart Photoshop. On a PC, you often want to quit Photoshop and reopen it. But then when we go to File, Print, we'll be able to see that profile on our profiles list. And so here you can see it says Finding, I believe, I'll drag this over. It says Finding Profiles. So it's recognized that I've added a new profile, and it's just double checking where it is and what it is. And so now it will be over here on our list, Juniper Baryta Rag Pro 1000 PPPP for Photo Paper Pro Platinum. If you're on a PC, once you download that profile, all you have to do is locate it, right click on the profile, and one of the options that will appear says Install Profile. And when you click on that, it will copy the profile into the appropriate Windows folder. If for some reason you right click on it and it doesn't say Install Profile, make sure that it has a .icc extension. Otherwise, the operating system doesn't know what the file is and doesn't know that it could be installed.
So when would you use perceptual and relative?
So those are rendering intents, and the rendering intent determines how out of gamut colors are printed on the page. So gamut is the amount of colors we have available to us, whether it's in a camera or in a file or in a print. And a lot of the colors we see in the world are not colors that we can print one-to-one. So a gamut describes that color volume, and a rendering intent, how that's mapped in. So we're going to take a quick trip back to Photoshop here and actually have a file open here. So this is called a gamut test file. This is sort of a torture test for your printer or for a profile. And on our screens, it looks pretty good. But what I can do is first I can do a soft proof, and I can show you that. Let's look at Juniper Baryta on the Pro 1000, that profile we just downloaded. This is a pretty wide gamut paper, so it allows for a lot of colors. And then I'm going to go to the view menu and show gamut warning. So that's going to show us what is out of gamut. And on this, anything that shows up bright pink is out of gamut. So quite a bit of it we cannot print directly one-to-one. So I'm going to turn that off, and then we're going to go to print. So in the print window is where we choose the rendering intent. And so it's right below color handling. We said Photoshop manages colors. We're going to pick that same Juniper profile, and then immediately below that we see rendering intent. Photoshop gives you 4 options. The only 2 you're going to ever need to choose from when you're printing photos are perceptual and relative. So these 2 work in different ways. Relative colorimetric is what we recommend using when most of your image is in gamut. Relative actually takes the out of gamut colors and moves them right into the edge of the printable space, and it doesn't change any of the in gamut colors. So it causes fewer color shifts and a little more predictability than perceptual. Perceptual is very useful in an image where you have a lot more out of gamut colors, because not only does it move out of gamut into the printable space, but it also moves the colors a little bit that we can print to keep all the relationships the same. So if you have, for instance, in this image, all this color box over here, if we choose relative colorimetric, we'll probably end up with a little banding in here because it's going to smash all the colors together at the edge of the gamut. If we choose perceptual, we should get a smoother gamut render here because it's going to adjust all of the colors. So I can actually here in print in Photoshop, I can say match print colors, and then I can display that gamut warning to kind of remind us of everything that's going to be out of gamut. So in an image like this, you'll get a better print with perceptual, but most of what we photograph these days is mostly in gamut. So I typically recommend relative colorimetric as your starting point.
So John has a question about what equipment do you use when you create your own ICC profile, and is it necessary to create your own ICC profile?
So when you're starting out, we recommend downloading our profiles and working with those. There's a lot of color science and testing and other things that go into making a profile. So if you are really wanting to dig into color and understand the process and that sort of thing, you certainly can make your own profiles. It's not inexpensive for the hardware as well. But if you're really getting into printing and you're feeling like, on my printer, maybe this could be a little better or that sort of thing, there are a number of providers listed on our website that will make you a custom profile just for that paper on your printer. So again, I'd say always start out with the profiles that we have. We endeavor to work really hard to make a very accurate, balanced, neutral profile that should work for most everybody. But if you want to be a color nerd, absolutely go for it. There's not a whole lot of us, and it's a lot of work, but it's really rewarding to make something that everybody gets to use that helps all you print a great photograph.
People have been asking if this will be available for viewing at a later time. Yes, this is being recorded, and we will send out a link where you can watch it directly in this webinar platform system that we're using, but also we will publish it to YouTube. Let's see.
I'm going to jump in. Someone had asked about how accurate is the out of gamut warning in Photoshop. I'm confident that it's very accurate because in digital, color is number. So we can kind of think of color on a on a three-dimensional graph. I've kind of a sample of that here. So if we look at this, this is a three-dimensional render of the solid is an ICC profile for print, and the wireframe is the Adobe RGB color space. So when you're doing a gamut warning in Photoshop, it's looking at the gamut data for the paper and the gamut data for the file, and anything that falls out of that mathematical space is what it's going to show you as out of gamut. So in that case, I think it's a very accurate tool to see what you can print and what you can't print. And that, of course, will change depending on your paper, because papers all have different gamuts, and also depending on your printer. So Juniper Baryta on the Epson P800 is going to have a different gamut than Juniper Baryta on the Canon Pro 1000. So it's all going to depend on your printer paper combination.
Great.
And how much difference there is between color gamut of paper versus monitor? That's another really great question. So often on a standard laptop screen or a kind of a standard desktop monitor, there's a good chance that your paper will have a wider gamut than your monitor. If you're doing a lot of photographic work, it can be a really worthwhile investment to get a monitor that displays full Adobe RGB. They actually call it 99% Adobe RGB to not make any false promises. But here in my office, I work on a lot of BenQ monitors. They're great because they're very affordable, and so for $600, $700, $800, you can get a 99% Adobe RGB screen, and it has a hardware calibration in it, so it's a very stable high gamut monitor, and that way you know that what you see on the screen is as good or better than what you'll see on a print, and you won't get any surprises. For those of you who are editing on laptops, if you're using Lightroom, there's actually a function in Lightroom that will show you, as the gamut warning does for paper, you can have a gamut warning in Lightroom to call out the colors that are in the image that you actually can't see accurately on the screen. So when you make the print, if something seems a little bit off, it could be because the color is not represented correctly on your screen.
Steve asks about printing from rolls and how to flatten your prints after you've printed it.
Ah, yes. So that can be a bit of a challenge. A lightweight matte paper or a luster or a canvas will often flatten out pretty quickly, but for papers that don't, the best thing you can do is to back roll it. And I have actually one that I made in the other room. I took a roll core, a leftover roll core, 24 inches, and taped a sheet of paper to it at 90 degrees. And so you lay the print on that face up, so curl up, kind of tuck the edge in, and as you roll it up, it's rolling at the opposite direction of the curl, and then put a couple of rubber bands on it, and usually after 5 or 10 minutes, you can unroll it, and then you're left with a pretty flat print. So that's kind of my homemade recommendation. There are a couple of, I think they call them D-rollers that are available, although it looks like they're usually $400 or $500. So for those of us who are not making that many roll prints, it's a quick job to just make your own. And maybe that's something we can put a little shot of on our website so that folks have a good idea of what to see.
So I just wanted to bring everybody's attention to the little offers button. That's a red dot on the left-hand side of the chat window. We're offering a free download of a fine art print ebook that Lester Picker, the photographer, wrote. And this is kind of soup to nuts of everything you need to know about setting up printing, and what to do after printing. And it also includes a chapter on how to choose papers. And that's the next topic I wanted to have Evan comment on. So we have a Moab sample box. There's your download free copy. Just put your email address in there and it sends you a link to download the copy of the book. It is 164 pages, fully illustrated, step-by-step guide with tips and tricks on how to get the perfect fine art print. And a lot of what we're talking about today is also included in that ebook. And this is free to you to enjoy.
And though it is kind of based in Lightroom for the examples, his concepts and his instructions and all that kind of stuff are really applicable whether you're using Photoshop or Capture One or even Apple Photos. It's all the same workflow, whether it's wrapped in a certain piece of software. So yeah, it's a great resource for everybody.
So can you comment a little bit on choosing papers?
Yeah, absolutely. So the benefit that we have in printing digital is we have so many different options for paper, and a lot of people look at that and go, "Oh my goodness, there's so many papers out there." Well, if you're starting out or you're looking for new papers, that sort of thing, we make a sample box, which is 2 sheets of all of our papers. Very affordable price. They're all labeled on the back. So the best thing to do is to pick one of your images, or 2 if you want, and print that one image on 5 or 6 different papers and see how the paper changes the image. Obviously, download all your color profiles and that sort of thing beforehand. But as a rule of thumb, a what we used to call glossy paper, but I think it's better if you call it a photo black paper. So a Baryta, a semi-gloss, a luster, a metallic, anything with a shine to it is going to appear to have a little more saturation and a little better shadow detail than a matte paper or a matte black paper. And that's because a photo black paper is going to reflect more light because it has a shiny surface. Whereas a matte paper, without the shiny surface, reflects a little less light and it scatters the light a bit that it reflects. So again, colors may not appear quite as saturated and you might see a little less shadow detail. But your goal as the photographer is to use that difference in surface to your advantage. So with paper, we have an opportunity to convey to the viewer how we want that image to feel. So if it's a foggy sunrise over a lake and we put that on a smooth finish cotton paper, we've taken a subtle image and we've printed it on a subtle paper. And so the viewer is going to immediately think, oh, wow, that's a soft morning light. But they're not looking at it to say, hey, what paper did you use? They're looking at it and they're getting that subconscious perception of the image. Whereas if you have a high key race car image or a starry sky at night and you put that on like our metallic pearl, a white base metallic that's got a lot of punch to it, a shiny surface, kind of that 3D depth you get from a metallic paper, you're doing the same thing but in opposite, you're really enhancing the details and kind of taking the viewer to how it felt right when they took that image. So we want to choose paper based on how it presents our image. Obviously, the final application. So I print a lot of, I print some photos for my parents, and it goes up on the fridge in the kitchen. Well, you don't really want to put a nice cotton paper up on the refrigerator because as you're slapping spaghetti sauce around or whatever, you can't just wipe it off. So something like a luster works great if you want to put it up on the fridge and have it be indestructible. If you're framing it with UV glass and that sort of thing, any paper works because you're really protecting it. If you're going to do a canvas or a matte paper and you're not planning on framing it, we do recommend our desert varnish spray, which gives it some scratch resistance, UV protection, that sort of thing. So if you want to just display the image raw to really show off the paper, you do want to give it a little protection from the environment. So hopefully that's kind of a good overview. I think one of these webinars in the future will spend a lot more time talking about paper and surface and base color and all that sort of thing. So that's definitely something that we'll put together to go in depth in the future.
Don has a question about tips for those working in black and white. Maybe you have comments on both the choosing of the paper for black and white, which is very subjective, of course, but also maybe on the printing process for black and white.
Yeah. So in terms of choosing paper, if you're doing the sample box thing and you're kind of lining them up, if you have the papers right next to each other, you'll definitely notice the difference between a warm white paper and a bright white paper and that sort of thing. So you might look at it and go, oh, wow, that's really warm. I don't know if I want to use it. But then if you take those papers and you separate them by a few feet, that comparison becomes much less noticeable. So a good thing is if you're going to test it, make a couple of prints and hang them up a little farther away from each other or look at them, separately and see what appeals to your eye. The Juniper Baryta is one of probably my favorite photo black paper for black and whites. And the Somerset Museum Rag I love for matte black and whites. it has an amazing amount of fine detail for a matte paper and a great contrast range. So those are the two that I really like for that. In terms of printing black and white, there's kind of two schools of thought on this. There are a lot of photographers, if you have an Epson printer, you have what they call advanced black and white mode. So we can go through that really quick. Let's see. So generally, I would say, test with the color profile, because the color profile takes into account when we print black and white, the printer actually uses often yellows and blues to enhance light gray or shadow tones. So you don't see it in the print, but if you look at it under a loupe, it has mixed a little bit of color in there, and the color profile will assist in that. It's also something that Epson's advanced black and white does. So we'll have to select an Epson printer. And then in this case, if you're using advanced black and white, you're going to leave it as printer manages colors. We're going to go into print settings. And on the Mac, first thing we have to do is say Epson color controls under color matching. And then under printer settings, we can go down and we can say print mode, advanced black and white photo. Now that gives you some options to color tone your black and white or adjust the overall tone as dark to light. So that's a good tool to test compared to a color profile and see which output you prefer. Obviously, this is going to warn me that I have selected printer managed colors. For Canon, they do have a black and white photo mode on their printers. That, from my understanding, actually just uses the black and the light black ink. So it's going to make a much slower print. But again, you can test the black and white photo mode versus the color profile and see. And that's in a similar spot. We're in a Canon Pro 10. If we go to quality and media, we can check the box for black and white photo print. Now, the difference between the Canon and the Epson is on the Canon, in just the print driver, you don't have any control over toning the print and that sort of thing. And if you want a toned print, if you check black and white photo, it's going to undo any toning you did because it's going to print just a straight black and white. So for a toned black and white, then you absolutely want to use a color profile, even though you're making a black and white print.
All right, we have a question from Dennis about displaying prints in a group show. So multiple prints in one show, is it recommended to use the same paper so everything kind of matches? Or again, is that subjective where the paper is ideal for the print?
Yeah, I would, if you're doing a series of similar prints, flowers or landscapes or portraits, then I would say probably a consistent paper would be a good way to go, because then you're kind of giving a full presentation. If you're varying your subject matter or you're varying your prints a lot, I think it would be just fine to mix your papers, because you're trying to say a different thing with each print. So I think that's going to depend on your subject, and there's definitely, if you're doing a group show, if you know the participants or you're in touch with them, then absolutely you could coordinate on papers. Or if you have 3 people showing 3 different subjects, maybe each one of you chooses one paper that complements your work, and you exhibit on all 3 papers. Because again, most of the people that attend the show are not going to be paying any attention to what paper you use. They're just going to be seeing the image on the paper and how you presented it. So definitely something to consider as a background. But I would say similar images, same paper, different images, then your pick whether you want to keep it consistent or match the print to the paper.
A couple more questions about post-printing. Spraying the prints. We have our desert varnish spray. Can you talk about that and what paper that's ideal for? Should it be used for Baryta papers, matte papers, metallic?
Yeah, so our desert varnish is designed just for matte papers. I do hear from some people who have used it successfully on a photo black paper, but because of the difference in surface coatings, if you use the spray on a photo black paper, you definitely risk having it kind of pill up on the surface or do some odd things, because it's not going to soak in like it does on a matte. When you apply the desert varnish to a matte paper, after a couple minutes, it does completely disappear. It doesn't change the surface look of the paper at all. And we also recommend at least 2 coats. So you're gonna have your print, and you're gonna spray it once horizontally, and then you're gonna wait about 5 minutes, rotate it 90 degrees, spray it horizontally again, so you're cross hatching on the print. And I believe we have a video on the site that shows the process. The biggest thing you want to do is you want to use desert varnish or another inkjet spray. You don't want to go out to the art store and get a clear lacquer or anything else like that, because the desert varnish is matched to work with the inkjet inks. And there are a number of clear lacquer products that you might use for art media where there's actually solvents in there that will dissolve some of the ink colors in your print pretty quickly. So when you are coating your prints, do make sure that you use an inkjet spray specifically. But I think in our estimation that the desert varnish doubles or triples the life of a matte print that's been coated versus one that's just hanging out uncoated. It's also a great product to use if you're going to have matte prints in a print portfolio or a book that a lot of people are going to thumb through. It helps prevent getting fingerprints on the corner or the prints scuffing against each other if a corner gets dragged across it, that sort of thing.
And can you, do you view your prints under specific lighting conditions?
Yes, so that's another great thing. And we'll reference a quick slide on that. Let's see. So the biggest thing we have to remember is that we only see color because that color is in the light that we're showing on the print, and we see the reflection of that. So with the move to efficient light bulbs, it's something you definitely want to be aware of. There's something that you'll see printed on a lot of light bulb boxes called CRI, Color Rendering Index. And what that is, it's a percentage of the visible spectrum. So if you have a bulb that has an 80 or an 82 CRI, you'll notice that it's missing both reds and blues in the light it puts out. So if you're evaluating your prints under an 80 CRI light bulb, you're potentially missing 20% of the colors in the print because it's not in the light. So the best thing you can do is have a light source that's consistent that you view your prints under, whether it's sunny out or cloudy out. Obviously, we say sunlight is the best evaluator, but even sunlight changes color depending on the time of the day. And obviously if it's cloudy, that's even more of a challenge. So you can get a traditional halogen bulb. That's a full spectrum bulb. And it's, of course, it's warm because it has extra infrared. And there are a lot of companies now that are making high CRI LED bulbs. So 95, 96. And again, it's not quite 100%, but it's very close. So that's a good thing to look at. The other thing to be aware of is color temperature. A halogen bulb is going to have a warm light, so your print might appear a little more yellow under halogen than it would, say, under daylight. But with a lot of these LED bulbs, you can also specify your color temperature, and that's in degrees Kelvin. So somewhere between 2,700 and 3,000 is about the temperature of a halogen bulb. Daylight is estimated to be around 5,000, 5,500. So for instance, this company out of California, this screen's a couple years old, but they offer this halogen bulb in 3,000, 4,000, and 5,000. So if you really want to jump into that, you could get a 3,000 degree bulb and a 5,000 degree bulb and switch them on and off and look at the print under that. For those of you who really want to jump into the professional side of things, there are viewing booths, they're called, to look at prints, and then you can turn UV on or off. You can change the color temperature, all that sort of thing, but those generally start about $800. So for the casual print viewer, a great investment is a one or two $30 LED bulbs that should last for many years. But that ensures that you're getting a very accurate look at your print, and then no matter where it goes, when it leaves your house, it's going to look good in that person's situation because you've looked at it under the best viewing conditions. It's sort of like getting a large gamut monitor, as we discussed. You're seeing all the colors in the file.
Alfonso has a question about Canon printers. He sees that you have a Canon in the background. He uses a Canon 6400, IPF 6400. Yep. He uses the Canon printer plugin with great result. But now with Windows 10 and Photoshop 2020, it seems that there is no plugin available from Canon. Do you have any info on that, if one is available?
Yeah, so that's been the real challenge with this migration to newer operating systems and older printers. I know in Mac OS Catalina 10.15, that older image prograph plugin also doesn't work. I believe it's on a 32-bit architecture, so they've done away with any 32-bit apps in Catalina. Um, so this is a quick little warning note to everybody as you're updating your software. Before you hit update on your operating system or your version of Photoshop or whatever else, do a little exploration, a little Q&A out there, and see what unintended consequences it might have, because I know especially Catalina um, caused a lot of issues for folks with their printers. And as far as your 6400, 8400, I'm not aware of a plugin that's available. If you have an older machine, you could repurpose that, unfortunately, as your printer. I haven't looked to see if they have just a driver available, so you could use the standard Photoshop print interface. But here in our office, I have two machines that are specifically dedicated to old operating systems just to run those older printers. So that's something to keep in mind. But sorry you've had that challenge, and it would be absolutely a great time a great time now. I don't know how many of them are working, but just give Canon a call, because their tech support is very knowledgeable and very well run, and they should hopefully have a recommendation for you. But yeah, just be aware as you update your software that there might be some unintended consequences, and maybe reach out, to Canon, to us if you have a question, to your fellow photographers, and say, hey, I'm thinking about this piece of software. Will there be regrets next week once I push the update button?
Steve has a question about any tips you might have for printing images with skin tones. He has a lot of trouble to get the proper colors on the paper.
All right. So Steve, that would be probably a good thing to email into us and give me a little more detail on what printer and paper combination you're using and your color profile, because that can be very specific. But generally with skin tones, they should be rendered pretty accurate with an accurate color profile. I'm trying to think about what causes issues with skin tones kind of in general. You could test the two different rendering intents and see if that makes a difference. Obviously, skin is almost always in gamut, but sometimes Perceptual will change it just a little bit. And then the only other thought is, if you're using a natural cotton paper that might be warmer, it might be warming up the perception of those skin tones a little bit. So Mark, what's our email address for general questions coming in? I know that you can use the contact us on the website, but is there an email that we use for incoming tech questions?
Yes, the best email address is info@legionpaper.com. And then we field those, and those eventually get to Evan. I'll put that up into the chat window as well.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you have a real specific question like that, something that maybe you're struggling with, if you can let us know what paper, what printer, and maybe rendering intent or that sort of thing, that'll help us kind of drill down and see what might be causing your issue.
Dan asked a question earlier on, and I'll kind of add to it a little bit. He's noticing some color shifts in prints after a period of time, turning a little bit yellow. What do you think that could be caused by? What's your feedback on that?
Yeah, so typically a print will yellow because of either a large UV exposure. So if you hang it in a window, or you hang it on a wall that faces a south-facing window that gets daylight all day with no UV, if you just hang the raw print up, if you're noticing that it's yellowing around the edge, that's indicative of it coming into contact with something that's affecting the paper. So all of our papers are acid-free, neutral pH, buffered, that sort of thing. So they're designed to be archival. And the challenge with a paper that is neutral pH and archival is that if you put it into contact with a substance that's not neutral pH, the acidic or the basic substance will try to dump off some of its acid and other chemicals onto that photo paper. So a lot of inexpensive photo frames are sold with the glass and then a backer board that's just cardboard. And cardboard is an incredibly acidic, non-archival product that you want nowhere near your finished photographs. So if you've maybe framed it in a frame with a cardboard backing, you'll notice the print will yellow around the edge because the cardboard is leaching acid into the photo paper. I know I spoke with a customer a year or so ago who was storing finished prints in a clear plastic bin from Home Depot. Well, unfortunately, those clear plastic bins are also not archival, so it was leaching something out of the plastic into the paper and turning the edges of it yellow. So store your finished prints in an archival box, or once you've let them off gas, you can put them in a clear bag. You'll notice that all of our papers come packaged in a clear plastic bag. Those are from a company called Clear Bags. Those are archival. And because of that, our boxes are standard chipboard, but when you put that archival barrier in there, then the box doesn't influence the paper that's stored inside the bag. So typically, if you're seeing yellowing around the edges of your print, it's either contact with something or there's some sort of contaminant in the air where you're working, whether that be ozone or pollution in a city, or if your neighbor smokes or whatever else. Those can all influence how the paper ages.
And would you suggest a buffered or a non-buffered board for on the matte board when you frame?
So typically, they're both very good. From my understanding, a buffered board gives you a little more insurance because the buffering is there to kind of absorb some of those environmental chemicals or other factors. So if you have, I think, the option for a buffered board, obviously, if you're working with a frame shop, ask your framer about that. But the buffered should give you just a little more insurance against environmental factors.
And also the unbuffered board was also primarily used for silver halide prints and palladium prints, so the buffering agent wouldn't interfere with the chemicals in those papers. One other.
Know that.
Terrell is using Photoshop to print, but he's heard printing with Canon printing software is more granular. Have you tried it? If so, do you see it as an alternative?
So let's see, there's a few layers to that question. Photoshop is very reliable for printing if you're using sort of last year's version. We're finding with this software update schedule that, say, Photoshop 2020, when it came out, especially with Mac Catalina, there were many color issues and other things that had to get worked out that I think have been mostly worked out at this point. But for the early adopters, it was definitely a challenge. The benefit that you have using the Canon software is it bypasses the Photoshop printing software and the Mac OS side of color management. So the Canon print plugin communicates directly to the printer. I have not personally noticed a quality difference in terms of dot output and that sort of thing. Some investigation, on a test print with a loop or a magnifying glass or a microscope would yield that. So in terms of dot quality and overall sharpness, I haven't seen a difference, but depending on your software setup, it might provide an advantage in terms of color stability and predictability and that sort of thing. And again, it's whatever works best for your workflow. So a lot of folks who have had a Canon printer for a while and are very used to that Print Studio Pro or their new professional print and layout, that's a great tool. But if you're recently coming over to Canon from an Epson printer or something else, and you're really used to the Photoshop print interface, I haven't seen a downside to using just Photoshop or Lightroom.
Elizabeth is asking what is a good alternative to Museo Silva Rag that she was using, and we would suggest the Juniper Baryta paper.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a very similar surface. The Juniper is, I think, just slightly warmer, but other than that, it will be a very similar print. You'll actually get a larger gamut out of the Juniper than you got out of the Silver Rag, so that's kind of a positive if you make that switch.
Steve's asking what gives the best result, printing via Lightroom or printing via Photoshop?
So there's There's, I know, debate about that online because they're both Adobe products. They use the same backend processing for print. Lightroom, I know you can select some automatic print sharpening to be applied and other things like that. There are some folks I've talked with that swear to do image prep in Lightroom and then print it to Photoshop. Others print everything out of Lightroom. Again, I've not seen an advantage either way in terms of quality. I think it's whatever fits your workflow and however you learned to go through the steps. Use whatever is most convenient, because the more convenient we make it for ourselves, the more likely we are to print and to explore and to try new things. But no, I haven't seen a quality difference between Photoshop or Lightroom for printing. I think Lightroom definitely has advantages if you're trying to use our artist cards or other things like that, where you want to place the image in a specific spot on the page, because with Lightroom you can make a template for that, which is not really possible in Photoshop. But overall output should be the same.
Okay, and just as a reminder, I said earlier on in the offers, if you haven't had a chance to look in the offers, we are giving away a free ebook on fine art printing written by Lester Picker. He's one of our Moab masters and a travel photographer, educator, author, and many other titles. And if you go into the offers link, you can download that free ebook, which gives you a step-by-step printing guide, 164 pages, fully illustrated. Next question we have up here.
I'm going to jump in here. Dennis asks, printing through Lightroom, what is the proper DPI to use? So we'll do a quick little primer here. DPI is dots per inch. So that's what the printer is laying on the paper. PPI is pixels per inch, and that's what your image file that you sent it. So typically, and this was more true, I think, back when computers were slower and files were smaller. Epson's native pixels per inch was 360. Canon's native pixels per inch was 300. So I was speaking with a photographer last month who still definitely recommends matching your file resolution to your printer. So 360 for Epson or 300 for Canon. Obviously, if you want to make a larger print, that requires a pretty large file. So that's something that you'll want to experiment with based on your images and your printer and your size and all that sort of thing. But in Lightroom, I think it defaults to 240. Let's take a look at this real quick. Switch screens. So here we are in the Lightroom print module. Yeah, so you can set your print resolution here. It's currently set to 240. You can enter anything. So you might try, if your image is large enough, setting that to 300 if you have a Canon, or 360 if you have an Epson printer. And again, that's, as it notes, PPI pixels per inch, which doesn't have any effect on the dots per inch, because dots per inch is how the printer is going to, what they call, raster your image. So it's not a one-to-one pixel to ink drop when you make a print. Your printer is going to mix in all sorts of different droplets of color to make, say, skin tones or hair or that sort of thing. So hopefully that answers that question a little bit.
Tom was asking about, what about printing from a rip?
Printing from a rip, again, it's kind of up to you. What is it? Image Print makes a rip that's really for professional photographers. Most rip products are for print shops, and the big advantage that they have is you can have a 44-inch printer and you can lay out many different size images on a roll, and the machine will print 20, 30, 40 feet of that roll, and then those can all be cut down. Again, a rip is going to bypass the Photoshop print information or that sort of thing, and the rip connects directly to the printer. So that's what you might use it for, but that again depends on your investment and all that sort of thing. And then a couple other people have asked about printing from Capture One or Affinity Photo or On One Raw. And again, there shouldn't be an advantage or disadvantage. Any well done photo software should have a very good print pipeline, and I know that's something, especially with On1, that they just recently added. So I think they're, they've worked really hard to make sure that it works really well, since it's a new feature. But no, definitely print out of the software that you're comfortable with, or the software that you've invested in. And if you're looking for a side-by-side comparison, if you have Photoshop and Capture One, run the same image at the same size out of that, and see if it differs at all, or if you have a friend using a different software, that sort of thing. Do a side-by-side comparison. That's always the best way to know, because I know looking online, everybody has their own opinions, but personal evaluation is always the best way to explore these things.
So we have just a few more minutes left, and I think Bob asked an excellent question about paper jammings. Do you have any recommendations how to avoid paper jams on an Epson P800? He has, but multiple printers as well.
Yeah, so the best thing to do, when you say paper jams, I'm guessing that you're having issues from the sheet feeder up on top. Put as few sheets in there as allows. If you're making 2 prints, put 2 sheets in there. If you're making 10 prints and you're able to maybe put 2 sheets in at a time, I know ours sometimes decides it wants to pick up the whole stack because it has trouble separating out those sheets. He says, I'm specifically referring to using the front loader. Got it. So for those of you who don't have an Epson P800, to load a fine art, you drop down this little shelf in the front and slide the paper in. Unfortunately, that is effectively, you're putting the paper in the printer opposite of the way it usually comes through. So the best way to avoid that is, if you can, drop that front tray and then load your sheet from the back. So if you load it from the front, it slides it through and then kind of ramps it up the back behind the sheet feeder. You can actually drop that front tray and then load your sheet from the back and slide it out to the front, which is much easier, because then you're routing the paper through the correct direction. So that would be my recommendation for the P800. Also applies to the P600.
I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap it up. Al is asking any comment on OEM versus compatible or third-party inks.
I would never use third-party ink. And I say that because the print manufacturer, the print head, and the inks are tightly manufactured together. And so for clogging and consistency, that sort of thing. So number one, a third-party ink is more likely to cause a lot more cleaning cycles in your printer because it's not optimized for your print head. So you're going to use a lot more ink. And number two, Canon and Epson and HP all make ink that is consistent. So the cyan you bought 2 years ago is going to be the same as the cyan you buy today, is going to be the same as the cyan you buy in 2 years. A third-party ink, you have no guarantee of consistency, and you have no guarantee of archivability. So in terms of how much ink you use versus what you might save on a sort of a wildcard ink, and one that's probably going to get used a lot more in your printer, it'd be sort of like buying a professional DSLR and then finding the cheapest lens and the cheapest filter you can and putting it on the front, and really negating all those pixels. You've invested in great printer, great paper. Don't cheat yourself on the ink. I know there are a couple of companies out there. For instance, Cone Inks makes a black and white set, so you can get a new printer and just put shades of gray in it. Something like that's designed for professional workflow. That's the only time you might want to use a third-party ink. But again, those aren't going to save you any money because they're professional inks designed for archival printing, and they appear at that price point. So yeah, definitely stick with your manufacturer's ink. It's going to cause you a lot fewer headaches, and it's going to ensure that what you print now is still going to look good in 20 years.
All right, so that's pretty much all the time that we have for this hour slot. So we intend to do more of these throughout the coming weeks and months, and we'll send out notices of when these will be posted. We set up a new website, a web page that has all our webinars and videos in the next, I think, 6 or 7 weeks, and we're continuing to add to it. I posted in the chat window the link, and that's just moabpaper.com/Moab-TV. And I know we didn't get to a lot of the questions that you asked, which were all fantastic. So if your question didn't get answered, just send us an email to info@legionpaper.com. That's info@legionpaper.com.
And Bob here is asking, hey, if you could possibly post a video of the technique you described. So yeah, if there's things that you want more information about, I'll try and go back through the comments here, but email us and maybe ask those questions. We can do kind of quick little informal how-to videos. And also, if there's something you'd like to see addressed in a future webinar, maybe we can take 2 or 3 topics and do a 15 or a 20 or a 30-minute more scheduled tight presentation with kind of some how-tos and that sort of thing. So appreciate you all coming to spend the time with us. This was a lot of fun. I hope it was valuable to everybody. Keep your questions coming and keep printing. It's what's our hashtag? Can't quarantine art. So we all feel separate here in our houses, but we definitely gives us a great time to be creative and hey, make a bunch of little 5x7s, send them out to all your friends with a little personal note. And what a great way to just kind of remind everybody that we're all here, we're all thinking of each other, and we're going to come out on the other side and be more creative people as we get there. So thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, and share anything that you have up on our Instagram, Moab Paper. Thank you very much. And stay safe, everybody.
Take care.